Welcome back to the Full Spectrum Show. Today we are, of course, looking at more neat things. And today's neat thing is pretty dang neat. It's coming straight from classified Groom Lake, aka Area 51. So, what is this? Really, honestly, we have no idea. But it has been taken on one of the runways, or at least a taxi to a runway, in some sort of weird, clear, hangar type deal. What it looks like is almost like an NGAD, or Next Generation Air Dominance fighter. And this is kind of what the prototype has been, or some of the prototypes have been kind of pictured to look like. Now, is this already in production? Well, obviously not production, but even prototyping in an actual working scale size and everything? That would be extremely impressive. I have my doubts, but at the same time, America has been leading in aircraft and aeronautical engineering technology for a long time. It just would shock me if after just getting the F-35s operational and going that we're already moving to a 6th generation type of fighter. Although, considering that there's so many countries already working on their 5th gens, and actually some in production, like China, it is no surprise that we're trying to get another step ahead either. So, interestingly enough, let's look at some of the theories of what this could be. And I do like this picture as an example of the type of edge of wing that it has, because it is very curved, unlike some traditional deltas that are very straight. Kind of like some of these prototypes, it really doesn't look like some of them, because you can see there's some pretty substantial curves on that girl. You know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? Like, that's pretty substantial, honestly. So, really interesting. And there's no visible, really, wing, although it is quite hard to tell at this resolution or at this altitude of resolution, because obviously the photo taken has extremely high resolution, but zooming in that far, you can only expect so much. And it is odd. What is this that's covered in? That is another great question. It almost looks like just a clear pop-up hangar, you know, like something you blow up, an inflatable hangar type of deal to protect from weather and things like that. But it could be a testing apparatus, or it could even be something to shield it from other types of imagery, not just standard imagery, but maybe it protects more from thermals, or even things on the radio wave side of things, or it might be able to stop radar from accurately depicting what it is on the ground if it doesn't have stealth capabilities, or stealth capabilities fully incorporated yet. Things like that are all possibilities. But that all leaves to assume that this is an actual top secret aircraft. I think going with the most obvious thing would be probably a drone that is in development. We did look at all those new Kratos drones that have been in development, although it is a respectable size aircraft, so it would be a pretty big drone if that's the case. Although it makes a lot of sense to me that it would be some of this new technology that we've been seeing up and coming in the drone field. Maybe it's even one of Kratos's themselves. I do want to shout out some honorable mentions though, because as we see down in the comments, Draken, yeah, kind of, not really. I think it's just a more smiley face and, you know, delta wing flying thing, and it's cool jet. Too much of a delta wing, I think, to actually, you know, be that. But this is a really intriguing one. I bet it's an F-16XL. And that might be quite possible, considering that NASA has owned one, and maybe still does. Although theirs is obviously painted in a much different color scheme. If they're doing testing, things like that, and they want to conceal the type of things that they're testing, painting it would not be a bad idea. And it's totally feasible that they just painted the jet, you know? Makes total sense. So it could totally be that. It is quite the interesting jet, and even though it's a prototype and only 2 were made, according to Wikipedia, so I'm taking that with a large grain of salt, but still, it does have quite the wing kind of shape. Obviously, it is still a bit of a delta wing, but you do see some indentations here, or indentations, I should say. So, that backside, it just still in the picture, even at the low resolution, it looks a lot more curvy than this, but this would be something that is really reasonable and understandable to leave out on a runway. And the reason I say that is because going to Groom Lake, even all the way back in the Cold War, they would conceal these aircraft. So it's totally understandable that when every time a satellite would come over, that they'd conceal it, just like they did back in the Cold War. When any time a Soviet satellite would come over, they would essentially move the plane back into a hangar. And eventually, it got into the realm of straight trickery, which, of course, secrets among nations is always going to come out to be a thing. But when the American spies had learned that the Soviets had obtained a drawing of an ox cart plane, and it was assumed the only way they could do that was via an infrared satellite. And although they knew the schedules of the satellites and at all times ensured that they would not be left out to be spotted by one of those satellites, if you leave something like out in the desert and leave something in the shade for a while, that shade is going to, or that spot of land that the shade was over is going to be a different ambient temperature than all the surrounding areas. So if they had the ox cart up on like a radar pylon, for example, the casting shadow, or even on the ground for that matter, just like cars in a parking lot would do the same thing, it would cast a shadow and change the ambient temperature around it. So of course, these scientists being real smart and being trickerous, they ended up going in and actually leaving fake aircraft out that were made out of cardboard and other materials that were very fanciful and really most likely would be a waste of time to research and develop, but it was a great idea to leave behind shadows, and they'd still hide them to not leave them out and make them seem like they were trying to trick them. They'd leave them just the actual infrared signature of that. They'd even go as far as to lighting jet engines and other things to make it seem like these aircraft were actually being test flown. So the level of trickery here has really no limit. So really, when I see a picture like this, nothing at all can be confirmed, and that's obvious coming from a place like Groom Lake or Area 51, but I just feel like I had to reiterate the amount of trickery that could be being played here. Maybe this is not even a clear hangar, for example. Maybe these guys have gone so far as to conceal their real aircraft underneath and painted it in such a way that it looks exactly like the runway underneath and a plane with, a shadow under it, casting under it at the perfect time of day that they knew a satellite was going to pass. Now, I'm not too sure that's even feasible anymore, because we look at all of the satellites that we have, right? I mean, there's so many satellites that are orbiting Earth. For example, as of January 1st, 2021, we had about 6,542 satellites orbiting the Earth. Now, obviously, not all of those are actually active. A lot of them are inactive and are just floating around until they fall out and are considered, essentially at this point, space junk. But about half of those, 3,372 satellites, are active. Now, given that pretty astounding number of floating things that are active looking down at us, although to be fair, not all of those are specifically imagery or spy satellites, I'd guesstimate that the majority are actually not. But the fact that there's that many, even if there's 100 around Earth, and you could actually pinpoint where you want to go, I imagine there's a lot of eyes looking down on Area 51 at all times. So the question is, can you really get away in today's age? Like in the Soviet era, we knew exactly when their satellites would be flying over, and I'm sure we have a schedule like that now, but how colluded is that? How dirty is that schedule in terms of like just the mass amount of satellites, like it must be quite difficult to be in and out of a hangar all day long to actually ensure that you're not getting spotted. So is it even possible to be doing ground tests and things like that without getting spotted by satellites? That's a great question. I'm not too sure that we can, honestly. Maybe somebody that knows more about space and satellites could fill me in, but I am curious about that. It does seem to me that with as many that we'd have, it'd be extremely difficult to hide something. And maybe that brings credence to this is the real deal. It's possible that this is just sitting out there and was a total mistake, and they just threw this makeshift hang over it real quick so that way, you know, it didn't get completely blown in high def photos. And it's hard to say. I don't see people out in the pictures rushing around, so it's almost like they left it out there. Maybe they left it out to find. There's just so many questions and so little answers, and I'm sure that we're not going to get those answers. So let me know what you think. I'm really curious to find out. This is a really interesting subject, and I'm really curious if we're already making prototypes of the next generation, the Generation 6 fighters. It'd be really interesting, and maybe there's some trickery going on here. I don't know. Some good old tomfoolery. But if you like this kind of content, please do make sure to like and subscribe and come back for some more. This is the Full Spectrum Show. Thank you so much for watching.